While Moscow parades tanks and salutes dictatorship, Ukraine becomes the center of diplomacy and defiance. From the uncovering of a Hungarian spy ring to Chinese power plays in the Kremlin, from Trump's unexpected call to Zelenskyy to record-breaking civilian casualties. The war may be not over, but the world is shifting. And Kyiv is not waiting to be told how the history ends. It's shaping it. You're watching The Gaze. Follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and our website for more stories you won't hear elsewhere. Let's get into it. May 9th marks the Day of Europe and the global remembrance of victory over Nazism. But not in Russia. There, May 9th is less about history and more about military parades, fuel fumes, and propaganda. This year, Putin isn't just marching tanks. He's marching out alliances, and not the kind that made Europe feel any safer. Among this year's hand-picked guests at the Kremlin are China's Xi Jinping, Brazil's Lula da Silva, and Slovakia's Robert Fico. And of course, North Korea's leadership, whose forces and weapons are now openly supporting Russian aggression against Ukraine. But what really raised eyebrows? A term used by Xi Jinping, friends of steel. That's how he described Russia and China's alliance, a phrase now officially confirmed by the Chinese Foreign Ministry.
President Xi Jinping pointed out that China and Russia are good neighbors with an unshakable friendship, true friends who share weal and woe, and good partners who achieve mutual success. China's relations have clear historical logic, strong endogenous driving force, and profound civilizational heritage. They are not directed against any third party and are not subject to any third party.
President Xi Jinping pointed out that China and Russia are good neighbors with an unshakable friendship, true friends who share weal and woe, and good partners who achieve mutual success. Xi's words left very little room for interpretation. China's position is clear. Their ties with Moscow are long-term, deeply rooted, and not up for negotiation, certainly not by any third party. And all this comes at a crucial moment as the US shifts its tone on Russia and China. Even J.D. Vance, US Vice President, typically cautious in his remarks, admitted that Russia is demanding far too much during the negotiations.
Well, we'll see what happens, of course, but look, we knew that Russia would ask for too much because the Russian perception of the war is on the ground, they're winning. And of course, the Ukrainians would like to do a ceasefire, in part because things have not been going so well for the Ukrainians the last few months. And our attitude is we don't want Ukraine to collapse. We obviously want Ukraine to remain a sovereign country, but Russia can't expect to be given territory that they haven't even conquered yet. And that's one of the things that they put down in that initial peace plan. So I actually think it's progress that they're even talking at all, the Russians and the Ukrainians. I think it's progress that they're putting concrete peace plans on the table. But we knew that the Russians' first offer would be too much. We knew that they would ask for more than was reasonable to give. That's how negotiations often work.
Help stop Putin so that this ends. And we may end up in a very long-term standoff, as we had with the Soviet Union, where we simply don't agree, but we're not at war. That I think, is where this is headed. Now, to Xi and China, I don't think Xi cares about Russia at all. I think they view it opportunistically. If Russia can sell them cheap energy, they'll buy it. If Russia will buy Chinese goods, they'll sell them.
Maybe some land.
They like the idea of weakening a Western grip on the global international order.
According to Walker, China's role isn't just symbolic, it's strategic and growing. Meanwhile, Moscow is preparing for its usual May 9th spectacle. Tanks are lined up, roads are blocked off, and patriotic music is blasting through loudspeakers. But this year, there's tension in the air. Because while Putin wants the world to focus on victory, the world is focused on drone strikes, sabotage fears, and internal instability. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy has even said that Ukraine cannot be held responsible for what might happen during this parade. And let's be honest, the day's not over yet. So let's see how it ends. For the first time in Ukraine's history, a spy network connected to Hungary's military intelligence has been exposed for conducting espionage operations targeting Ukraine. This revelation comes directly from the Security Service of Ukraine, and it's not just disturbing, it's unprecedented.
The objective of this network was to gather intelligence on the military defenses of the Zakarpattia region, identify vulnerabilities in its ground and air defense systems, and assess the socio-political views of local residents, particularly how they might react if Hungarian troops were to enter the region. Following a series of comprehensive operations in Zakarpattia, the security service detained 2 agents from this Hungarian intelligence network.
The investigation revealed the curator of these spies was a career officer of Hungary's military intelligence, whose identity has already been established. The agents themselves turned out to be former military personnel. And the mission didn't stop at opinions. One of the agents was instructed to map out Ukrainian military units, determine how many vehicles were stationed in the region, assess the capacity of law enforcement, and report on weapons availability on the black market. He even conducted physical reconnaissance of Ukrainian Defense Force and C-300 surface-to-air missile systems positions, gathering exact coordinates. But this wasn't just a local job. The SBU says Hungary's military intelligence planned to expand this network's capabilities, eventually pulling intel not just from Zakarpattia, but closer to the front lines. The story deepens in March 2025 when Ukrainian counterintelligence documented a second meeting between one of the agents and his handler. That agent received a new mobile phone preloaded with encrypted communication software and a new list of assignments. He was now expected to track official vehicles used by Ukraine's military leadership in the region, and to pass on data about casualties and frontline developments. Notably, he had already established a contact within the defense forces to funnel that information. Another agent turned out to be a former servicewoman of Ukraine's security and defense forces, who had left the military in 2025. Her job was to provide intel on aircraft and helicopter activity in Zakarpattia, as well as sensitive details about air defense systems from the unit she once served in. The SBU says all necessary legal actions are now underway to bring every member of the network, including those abroad, to justice. And now I'm making a colossal effort not to make a joke about Viktor Orban. The situation really begs for it, but no, we'll behave. So let's just slide smoothly into more news. One of them is at war. The other wants to be back in the White House. On May 8th, the day of victory over Nazism, President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and Donald Trump held a rare direct phone call. According to Zelenskyy's official Telegram channel, the conversation was described as warm and constructive, a tone we don't often hear in global diplomacy these days. They reportedly congratulated one another on the occasion of Victory Day and also welcomed the ratification of the US-Ukraine Economic Partnership Agreement, recently approved by the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine. That deal is being framed as a major step toward rebuilding Ukraine's post-war economy and possibly aligning strategic interests further.
We spoke with the President about joint actions, the support of the United States that is so urgently needed, and pressure on Russia, pressure for the sake of peace. We discussed the situation on the front lines. We discussed diplomatic efforts. We talked about how to bring closer a real and lasting ceasefire for at least 30 days. That could open up many opportunities for diplomacy. Ukraine is ready for a full ceasefire starting right now from this very moment, a 30-day silence. But it must be real.
Shortly after the phone call, Trump made a statement on the social media platform Truth Social. He said that negotiations on a ceasefire in Ukraine are ongoing and warned of sanctions for any violations.
The US calls for, ideally, a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. Hopefully, an acceptable ceasefire will be observed, and both countries will be held accountable for respecting the sanctity of these direct negotiations. If the ceasefire is not respected, the US and its partners will impose further sanctions. Donald Trump, President of the United States, on Truth Social.
He also reiterated that thousands of young soldiers are dying weekly and everybody should want it to stop. Trump added that he would remain committed to ensuring peace between Russia and Ukraine alongside Europeans. And a lasting peace it will be.
This ceasefire must ultimately build toward a peace agreement. It can all be done very quickly, and I will be available on a moment's notice if my services are needed. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Donald Trump, President of the United States, on Truth Social.
While Moscow rolls tanks through Red Square, Europeans rolls into Ukraine. On May 9th, as Europe celebrates its Day of Unity, Kyiv became the capital of that unity, with delegations from 35 countries and the Council of Europe arriving to stand with Ukraine. Estonian Prime Minister Kaja Kallas captured the spirit of the moment perfectly. In Lviv, EU foreign ministers had an informal but deeply symbolic meeting. The agenda was packed and direct. More weapons and support for Ukraine. Increased pressure on Russia. Accelerating Ukraine's EU membership. And yes, steps towards creating a tribunal to prosecute Putin and his partners for war crimes. And the diplomacy doesn't stop there. On Saturday, May 10th, the leaders of Germany, France, and United Kingdom, and also Poland, are expected in Kyiv for official commemorative events. In the shadow of Kremlin's parades and propaganda, this visit is more than a photo operation. It's a message that Ukraine isn't alone and that Ukraine's future runs through Kyiv. We'll be watching it closely. So much for the peace talks. According to a new UN report, April 2025 was the deadliest month for civilians in Ukraine in the past 6 months. And just to connect the dots, this spike in deaths came immediately after the Kremlin began pushing for its so-called peace proposals. While Russian officials were talking about negotiations, they were simultaneously launching dozens of strikes on residential neighborhoods across Ukraine, some of them using cluster munitions. In other words, the missiles didn't get the memo. Civilians were hit in Kharkiv, Zaporizhia, Dnipro, and Kyiv. The UN also documented direct targeting of non-combatants, including families trying to flee frontline zones. Our military correspondent, Alona Khramova, was near the front lines and joined an evacuation crew helping to move civilians out of high-risk areas. The footage speaks for itself, and so do the numbers. If this is Russia's version of peacemaking, we suggest they find a new dictionary.
From the Pokrovsk district in Donetsk region, evacuation of civilians continues. In some settlements, mandatory evacuation has been announced for families with children. Police evacuation teams known as White Angel arrived in armored vehicles to pick people up.
Let's go!
These officers are from Bakhmut. After their hometown was occupied by Russian forces, they continued their work and are now saving residents of Pokrovsk district. This trip is to the village of Sweetle, just 15 kilometers from the front line. They are evacuating a large family.
We chose a relatively safe route because all access roads are currently targeted by enemy drones.
The village of Sweetly is under artillery and drone attack by Russian forces. The family being evacuated is given bulletproof vests and seated inside an armored capsule.
Maybe sit the little one there, closer to the wall.
The three sisters, aged 7, 14 and 17, were living with their father and adult brother. Their mother passed away 8 years ago. Why didn't she leave earlier?
Well, it wasn't as loud before, just some explosions, but now it's really close.
The White Angel evacuation teams have been operating in combat zones since December 2022.
First, police take people from the shelled areas to a shelter, then volunteers help relocate them to safer regions.
This evacuated family will soon be taken by volunteers to Kyiv region, where they'll receive housing assistance. Since mandatory evacuation for families with children began in late March, over 300 minors have already been evacuated from Pokrovsk district with their parents. Reported by Alexandra Zaslavets, Alena Hramova from Donetsk region, UATV News.
So today we saw how May 9th means very different things depending on where you stand. In Moscow, missiles and nostalgia. In Kyiv, diplomacy, unity, and resilience. What do you think? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Which alliance worries you the most? What do you expect from these peace talks? And stay tuned for more with the gaze.